I broke my leg, so I asked my son-in-law to bring me some water. Get it yourself. I'm not your servant, he growled, while my daughter remained silent. I forced myself to smile and got up. At dawn, I dialed one number. By lunchtime, they had nothing left. This arrogant son-in-law thought he could humiliate an old man, but reality hit hard. Betrayal won't go unpunished, and the consequences struck like lightning. Before continuing, subscribe to our second channel. You can find the link to it in the description of this video, in the comments, or just click the subscribe button. Thank you. My name is Ray Gardner, 68 years old, living in Charleston, South Carolina, in a house I bought with my own hands back when this city smelled more like pluff mud than craft beer. For 31 years, I worked as a senior auditor for the Internal Revenue Service. My job was simple: find the lie buried in the numbers. People are creative when they're hiding money, but numbers don't breathe, numbers don't blink, and I got very good at reading both. I retired in 2019. Since then, my mornings belong to coffee on the back porch, and when my knees cooperate, fly fishing on the Edisto River. I keep 14 vintage watches in a glass case in the study. The oldest is a 1962 Omega Seamaster. One paid $3,800 for at an estate sale. I wind it by hand every Sunday. Some things deserve that kind of patience. 1847 Wentworth Drive is a two-story colonial from 1984. About 2,100 square feet, oak floors, a porch that runs the full front width. The house is worth $485,000, according to the last county assessment. I know that number well. Apparently, so does my son-in-law. His name is Trevor Cameron. 38. He owns a small construction company, Cameron Renovations, LLC. He is the kind of man who shakes hands too firmly and laughs a little too loudly at his own jokes, especially when he's nervous. When my daughter Nicole first brought him home 5 years ago, I noticed the way he scanned the room before he sat down. Not curiosity, calculation. I told myself I was being unfair. Not every man who measures a room is planning to take it from you. I was wrong about that. Nicole is 36. She has her mother's eyes, and for most of her life, her mother's stubbornness. In a good way. Growing up, she argued with teachers not to be difficult, but because she wanted to understand why the answer was what it was. That version of Nicole I miss every day. The one who moved in with Trevor 2 years ago is a different person, quieter in ways that don't mean peaceful. She moves around him like someone who has learned where all the sharp edges are. The move-in was presented as concern. "Dad, you're alone in that big house," Nicole said. "Trevor and I were talking. What if we stayed with you for a while? Help around the place." I said I wasn't lonely. She said it wasn't just about me. Trevor's company was going through a slow stretch. They needed to cut expenses. Just temporarily. Temporary. That word does a lot of work in this family. For the first 2 months, I'll admit, it was almost pleasant. Trevor fixed the gutter that had been sagging since the previous winter. He called me Ray with a friendliness that felt real. Maybe it was then. Maybe the genuine version of Trevor Cameron lasted exactly 63 days before the other one took over. It happened gradually. Trevor started leaving work boots at the front door that tracked mud across floors I cleaned weekly. Then it was the thermostat. He liked it colder, changed it without asking. Then the living room television became his from September through February, which in the NFL means most of the year. I started watching the evening news in my bedroom, in my own house. The conversation started too, slipped in sideways. "A place this size must cost a fortune to maintain, Ray. And if something happened to you, Nicole would have a nightmare with probate. Have you thought about putting the house in both your names?" And once, over breakfast, "My accountant says putting family property into a joint trust is the smart move. Protection for everyone." I nodded and said I'd think about it. I had thought about it. The way I used to think about a tax return that came in too clean, with no rough edges. The kind that tells you someone worked very hard to make it look effortless. The accident happened on a Wednesday morning. I'd gone out to get the newspaper, and the porch step was wet from overnight rain. My left foot slipped. I went down hard, and the fibula in my right leg made a very unpleasant acquaintance with the concrete. Nicole drove me to the emergency room. By Friday, I had a cast and crutches and orders to stay off my feet. By Saturday morning, Trevor was in the armchair watching a pregame show at a volume that treated the walls as suggestions. I'd been managing fine. Slow trips to the kitchen, careful navigation. But I was thirsty, and Trevor was 2 meters away doing nothing in particular. "Trevor," I said, "could you get me a glass of water?" He didn't look away from the screen. "Trevor?" He turned his head the way you turn toward a sound you're annoyed to have heard. "Get it yourself," he said. "I'm not your servant." 4 words. The look was the part that stayed, dismissive in the specific way that comes from certainty, not irritation. He was certain I wouldn't do anything about it. He was certain the dynamic in this house had shifted enough that he didn't need to pretend anymore. I looked at Nicole. She was at the kitchen table with her phone. She looked up. 12 feet away, she'd heard every word, and then she looked back down at her screen. Not a word. I lay there 3 seconds. Then I smiled. I picked up the crutches. I got to my feet. I moved slowly to the kitchen, filled a glass from the tap, and drank it standing at the window. Trevor was still watching his pregame show. From the window, I could see the side of his face, comfortable, settled, completely at ease in a house that belonged to someone he'd apparently already decided wasn't going to be a problem. I set the glass down on the counter. "You just made the most expensive mistake of your life, son." Sleep didn't come that night. I've never trusted people who fall asleep immediately after something important happens. It tells you they're either saints or not paying attention. I lay on top of the covers and did what I always did before a major audit. I organized. Every fact I knew, every observation, every offhanded comment. I pulled them out one by one and laid them flat in my mind, the way you spread documents across a conference table before making connections. The water incident was not an incident. It was the end of a performance. When a performance ends, it means the performer has decided he no longer needs the audience. Trevor had decided he no longer needed me to think well of him. That meant he'd either gotten what he came for or was very close. He hadn't gotten anything yet. I'd been careful. But now the conversations came back with new clarity. The house must cost a fortune. Probate is a nightmare. Joint trust, protection for everyone. Not observations. Preparations. The kind of language you use when you're building a case slowly enough that the other person thinks they thought of it themselves. I got up at 1 a.m. My leg protested. I ignored it. In the study, I keep a leather journal I've had for 12 years. I write in it rarely, things I want to remember. I sat at my desk and started writing from the beginning. Every comment Trevor had made about the house. Dates as close as I could recall. Every reference to property value. Estate planning, getting things in order. By 2:30, I had 4 pages. Then I opened my laptop. A 68-year-old man with a bad leg at past midnight, navigating a state business registry database. I understand how that sounds, but I spent 3 decades reading things like this. The South Carolina Secretary of State's business portal is not complicated. You search a name, you read the filings, you notice what's there, and more importantly, what isn't. Cameron Renovations, LLC, registered 4 years ago. Found it in under 4 minutes. The annual report from 2 years back had been filed 4 months late. A flag. More interesting, 3 civil complaints in the Charleston County Court database. 3 separate subcontractors had sued Trevor's company for non-payment. Combined claims, $41,000. 2 cases still active. That kind of pattern in a small operation doesn't come from bad luck. It comes from money going somewhere it isn't being reported. I pulled up public contracting records for Charleston County and the surrounding municipalities. Trevor's company had completed 3 county-adjacent projects over the past 2 years. Combined contract values in procurement records, approximately $340,000. The declared profit on the company's filed documentation, $28,000. I sat back in my chair. That gap is not explained by ordinary business expenses in a 2-person operation, not without accounting that carries a very specific name in federal statute. I thought about something Nicole had mentioned 18 months earlier, a client paying Trevor cash for a kitchen job in Mount Pleasant because he didn't want a paper trail. She'd said it the way you say things you've decided not to think too hard about. I kept thinking about Nicole while I worked. Not the Nicole who'd stared at her phone when her husband told her father to get his own water. The earlier one. She was 9 and we were at the Edisto River on a Saturday morning. I was teaching her to fly fish, the real kind, which requires patience most kids don't have. She decided she was going to catch something before lunch. She didn't catch anything, but she stood in the shallows for 3 hours, in rubber boots, 2 sizes too big, practicing the cast, refusing to quit. When we finally packed up, she said, "Next time, Dad." Not disappointed, determined. I thought about that morning at 3:15 in the morning, sitting with a legal pad full of numbers, and something tightened in my chest that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite anger. It was recognizing a loss you hadn't fully acknowledged yet. She was still in there somewhere. The woman who stood in that river for 3 hours didn't just disappear. She'd been talked into quietness, step by step, the same way I'd been talked into ignoring the thermostat and the living room and the breakfast table conversations about estate planning. Gradual, deliberate, patient. Trevor Cameron was patient in a way that told you he'd practiced this approach before. Find the path of least resistance. Apply steady pressure. Wait for the other person to stop pushing back. I'd spent a career identifying that quality in financial records. The difference was that I had a practice skill too. By 5 in the morning, I had everything organized. The journal with dates, the registry notes, cross-referenced contract values against declared figures, a 4-page comparison document, clean columns, clear methodology, the kind of analysis I used to prepare before forwarding a case for review. I looked at it. I was not angry. That was the clearest thought I had at 5 in the morning. I was simply prepared to let the numbers speak. I picked up my phone. In my contacts, under F, there was a name I hadn't called in nearly 3 years. D. Foley, IRS Columbia, Dennis Foley. 34 now. I'd supervised him for 4 years before retirement. Cautious, methodical, thorough to the point of occasional frustration. Exactly what you want in a field agent. He owed me nothing professionally, but I'd spent 2 years teaching him to see what he was looking at. That kind of debt doesn't go on a ledger, but it doesn't disappear either. Outside, the sky above the rooftops was the dark blue that comes an hour before sunrise. Not night anymore, not yet morning. Somewhere above me, Trevor Cameron was sleeping without a care in the world. I pressed call. Dennis Foley picked up on the third ring. He sounded the way a man sounds when his phone rings before 6, and the number on screen is one he hasn't seen in years, somewhere between surprised and careful. "Mr. Gardner." "Dennis." I kept my voice level. No apology for the hour. He'd worked for me long enough to know I didn't call early without a reason. "I need 10 minutes, not as a favor, as a professional consultation." A pause. "Go ahead." I told him the situation the way I used to brief junior analysts before a review. Facts first, context second, opinion last, and clearly labeled. I did not mention the water. I did not mention Nicole's silence or Trevor's posture in the armchair. None of that was relevant. What I told him: a small construction LLC, registered in South Carolina, 2-year revenue history showing approximately $340,000 in public contract work and $28,000 in declared profit. 3 active civil complaints from subcontractors, totaling $41,000. Annual report filed 4 months late. I heard him writing. "Mr. Gardner, you know how this works. I need documentation, not a phone summary." "I know how it works," I said. "I taught you how it works." Another pause. Shorter. "Send me what you have. Officially, I'm not making commitments." "Officially," I said, "neither am I." I spent the next hour assembling the document package. 4 pages of analysis, cross-referenced contract values against declared figures, the court complaint records, the registry printouts, the same format I'd used for 3 decades. Clean columns. The gap between the numbers made its own argument. At 8, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table watching the street. Upstairs, I heard the shower run. Footsteps. Then Trevor's voice in the particular cadence of someone talking to someone they're either impressing or pressuring. He came downstairs at 20 past 8. Button-down, jeans, work boots. Dressed for something that wasn't sitting at home. He poured coffee without looking at me. Opened his laptop. typed with the confidence of a man who has decided the other person in the room is not worth noticing. I watched him over the rim of my mug. After 31 years of auditing, I developed what I can only call professional patience. You learn to watch without reacting. You let the subject behave naturally because a person who believes they're safe stops being careful. They can't help it. Trevor believed he was safe. His phone buzzed twice. He glanced each time with the controlled reaction of a man trying not to react, which is itself a reaction. At 9:15, it rang. He stood up so quickly his chair scraped the floor and walked to the back porch, pulling the door mostly closed. I couldn't hear specifics. What I could hear was the tone, a voice starting confident and becoming less so, sentence by sentence, the way a building makes noise when its foundation shifts. When he came back inside, his jaw was set in a way that had nothing to do with the casual morning he'd been performing 20 minutes earlier. He didn't look at me, took his keys off the hook. "Got a job site," he said to the general vicinity of the kitchen. "On a Sunday?" I asked pleasantly. He didn't answer. The front door closed. I sat with my coffee. I'd spent 3 decades identifying the difference between a man who has a problem and a man who doesn't yet know he has one. Trevor Cameron was moving from the second category into the first. He just didn't know it yet. An hour later, I called the number I'd found the night before on the Avo attorney directory. Carla Burns, Real Estate and Trust Law, 214 King Street, 4.8 out of 5 from 63 reviews. The receptionist said Ms. Burns had availability Monday morning. "I'll take it," I said. When I hung up, Nicole was standing in the kitchen doorway. She'd been there long enough to hear the end of the conversation. She was holding her coffee and looking at me with an expression I recognized from when she was a teenager. The look of someone who suspects they're missing information but isn't sure they want it. "Who was that?" she asked. "An attorney," I said. "I'm getting some things organized." She waited for more. I didn't offer it. She nodded and moved to refill her cup, and the silence between us settled into something careful that I chose not to disturb. I attached the 4-page package to an email, typed one line, "This is what I referenced. Call when reviewed," and sent it to D. Foley, IRS Columbia. Then I went to the porch and waited. That afternoon, Trevor returned in a different kind of mood, compressed, watchful. He moved through the house at a different pace and spoke to Nicole in a lower register, not intimate, but contained. On the back porch again, into his phone, I heard the tail end of a sentence. "Need to close the property question before summer." Property question. I turned that phrase over in my mind, the way I used to turn over a number that didn't fit its column. Patient, attentive, recording. The timeline I'd assumed, gradual, over months, had just compressed. Trevor wasn't waiting for a natural opening. He was working toward a deadline, which meant my Monday appointment with Carla Burns was not a preliminary conversation. It was urgent. Foley called back the next morning at 9 sharp. I was at the kitchen table with my second coffee. Trevor was upstairs. I could hear him moving, that particular rhythm of a man getting dressed in a hurry. "I went through what you sent," Foley said. His voice had the flatness of a man choosing words carefully. "I won't discuss specifics, but I'll say this. The discrepancy you identified falls within a range that would typically warrant a preliminary review." "How long?" I asked. "I can't give you timelines. I can tell you that when documentation reaches the threshold for referral, the process moves on its own schedule." "But it reached the threshold?" Silence, which was itself an answer. "I appreciate the call, Dennis." "I didn't call you," he said and hung up. I sat for a moment with the particular satisfaction of a calculation that has checked out. Not triumph, too early for that, just the quiet confirmation of a number that adds up. At 20 to 10, I called a car service. My leg was in no condition for logistics with crutches, and 40 minutes later, I was in an elevator on King Street, rising to the 5th floor with the deliberateness that a broken fibula encourages. Carla Burns stood to shake my hand, with a directness I appreciated immediately. Her office was clean and organized in a way that communicated competence without advertising it. No framed diplomas in theatrical rows. Just a good desk, 2 chairs, and someone who looked like she'd heard complicated situations before and hadn't been impressed by any of them. I told her everything in the way you brief someone paid to assess and act, not sympathize. The house, $485,000. The move-in framed as temporary help, now entering its second year. The property conversations. The IRS situation I'd set in motion. The phrase from the evening before. Close the property question before summer. She listened without interrupting, made notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she set her pen down. The most likely approach, given what you've described, is pressure through your daughter, she said. A request to add Trevor's name to the title, framed as an estate planning measure. Possibly a quitclaim deed, simple to sign, nearly impossible to reverse without proving coercion. I know what a quitclaim deed is, I said, a slight recalibration. Then you know that prevention is considerably simpler than remedy, which is why I'm here. She recommended a revocable living trust. I would transfer the property into the trust with myself as both trustee and sole beneficiary during my lifetime. Full control retained, the right to sell, modify, or revoke at any time. But the title would be held in trust, and any attempt to alter that arrangement without my explicit consent would run into South Carolina trust law, which is not a forgiving structure for people trying to work around it. How long to execute? I asked. Documents ready within the week. You sign before a notary. County recording takes 3 to 5 business days after that. Start today, I said. She quoted the fee. $3,200. I wrote her a check from the checkbook I'd brought in my jacket pocket. She looked at it briefly, then at me. Mr. Gardner, are you expecting them to move soon? Within weeks, I said. Possibly less. She nodded and started writing. Then let's not waste time. The car brought me home by noon. I came in through the front door and found Nicole in the kitchen making lunch. She glanced at me, then at my jacket. Maybe the outline of the checkbook. Maybe just the way I carried myself. Doctor's appointment? She asked. Attorney, I said, getting my affairs in order. I used that phrase deliberately. Getting my affairs in order means something specific, and also something much more general, and people who hear it from a man of 68 usually don't press for clarification. Nicole didn't. She turned back to the counter. Trevor came home that evening quieter than he'd been in weeks. He sat through dinner with the compressed energy of a man running scenarios, eating without tasting, answering in single sentences. I watched him the way I used to watch subjects of extended audits, noting not just what they said, but where their attention went when they thought no one was tracking it. His attention that evening kept going to me, not the dismissive glance of a man who'd written off a problem. This was different. This was assessment. Something had introduced a variable he hadn't planned for. Maybe the IRS referral had rippled into somewhere he could feel it. Maybe something else. I didn't know yet. What I knew was that the calculation had changed for him. After dinner, I sat in the study and wound the Omega Seamaster by hand. 14 rotations, slow and deliberate. Through the wall, Trevor and Nicole were talking in low voices in the living room. The trust documents would be ready by the end of the week. The IRS process was already in motion. I had an attorney who understood the situation and a plan that operated entirely within the law. Trevor Cameron had decided a 68-year-old man on a fixed income was a door waiting to be opened. He'd been patient, methodical, in his way reasonably clever. He had not accounted for the possibility that the door already knew he was coming. I set the watch back in its case and went to bed. For the first time in 2 years, I slept without difficulty. Nicole was still awake when I got back from the attorney's office. She was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she'd stopped drinking. The kind of cold tea that happens when something is occupying your mind more than the drink in your hand. She looked up when I came in, watched me work through the door on the crutches, and waited until I'd settled into the chair across from her before she said anything. Dad. She kept her voice level, the way she used to when she was 16 and handling something without making it bigger than it needed to be. What's going on? I set the crutches against the wall. Outside, a car went past on Wentworth Drive. I spent the morning with an attorney, I said. Carla Burns, on King Street, real estate and trust law. Nicole's expression didn't change much, just a small tightening around the eyes. Why? Because I own a house worth $485,000, and I've been meaning to get my estate planning in order for 2 years. I stopped putting it off. She was quiet for a moment. Trevor came back upset today. He won't tell me what happened. Businesses have complicated days, I said, especially when their financial records don't match their revenue history. I watched her process that. Nicole has always been quick. It was the part of her that the years with Trevor had suppressed, not eliminated. I could see her making connections, even if she wasn't ready to say them out loud. "Did you do something?" she asked. "I passed along some public information to a former colleague," I said. "Everything I submitted is available in the SC Secretary of State's registry and the Charleston County Court records. Anyone can look it up. I organized it." She looked at her hands, then at me. "Trevor says the IRS review is a misunderstanding." I didn't answer right away. Silence, deployed correctly, is more informative than any argument you could make in the same space. "Nicole," I said finally, "I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because someone in this house has been making plans that affect me without consulting me, and I'm 68 with a broken leg, and apparently that's supposed to mean I don't notice." Something shifted in her expression. Not agreement, exactly. More like the face of someone told a thing they already knew and had been working hard not to see. She didn't say anything else that night. The next morning, Trevor came downstairs in a suit. Not his usual button-down combination, but an actual jacket, pressed slacks, leather shoes that had been recently polished. He poured his coffee, checked his phone twice, and left without eating. I noted the time, 8:17. Men put on suits for two kinds of reasons. Either they have something important to accomplish, or they need to look like they do. The polished shoes told me it was the second kind. 2 days later, Carla Burns called. The trust documents were drafted and ready for signature. I took a car back to King Street that Thursday morning. The signing took 40 minutes, 14 pages initialed, 3 signatures. When I was done, 1847 Wentworth Drive was no longer a simple fee simple property in my name. It was now held in the Ray Walter Gardner Revocable Living Trust, with me as trustee and sole beneficiary during my lifetime. County recording would take 3 to 5 business days, Carla told me, meaning that within the week any title search on my property would return a result that Trevor Cameron and whatever attorney he'd retained would find distinctly inconvenient. The property would no longer be a simple asset he could pressure his way onto. It would be a trust with one beneficiary, one trustee, and one person who controlled both. I thanked her and spent the afternoon on the back porch watching the mourning doves work through the birdseed in the feeder by the fence. There are worse ways to wait for the other shoe to drop. That evening, Trevor sat across from me at dinner, with the expression of a man who has recently received bad news from a professional he's paying. Not angry. He was too controlled for open anger. Just compressed, running something in his head over and over, the way you do when a number keeps coming out wrong. He excused himself to the back porch twice during dinner. Both times Nicole watched him go with the careful neutrality of a woman who's learned that asking questions creates more problems than it solves. The following morning I got a call I'd anticipated, but not quite so soon. Carla had received a letter of representation from a David Whitmore at a firm on Broad Street, Trevor's attorney making formal contact. "It means he's taking this seriously," Carla said, "which means you were right to move when you did." "The trust recording, it's still on schedule?" I asked. "Should complete by Monday. Once it does, any approach through your daughter to alter the title becomes legally untenable." "Good," I said, and meant it simply, without drama, the way you mean things when a calculation works out as expected. Nicole came to me 2 evenings later, not Trevor's version of Nicole, not the woman who'd studied her phone while her father stood on a broken leg in the kitchen, the earlier one. She sat down at the table with the directness of someone who has made a decision and isn't going to walk it back. "I want to understand what's happening," she said. "All of it." I looked at her for a moment. She held the eye contact. I got up on the crutches and went to the study, retrieved a folder I'd prepared 3 days before, and brought it back to the table and set it in front of her without comment. Inside, the 3 civil complaints from the Charleston County Court database. Plaintiff names. Defendant, Cameron Renovations, LLC. Amounts, $14,200, $17,350, $9,450. Total, $41,000. 2 cases still active. Nicole didn't pick up the pages immediately. She looked at them the way you look at something you already half know is there. "Where did you get these?" she said. "Public court records. Anyone with internet access can search them." She picked up the first page. Read it. Her face went very still. Not theatrical, just still, which is worse. "He told me those were misunderstandings," she said, "that the subcontractors had inflated their bills." 3 separate subcontractors, I said. 3 separate lawsuits. Same pattern. Different people. She set the page down. "He said, Nicole." I kept my voice even. "I'm not telling you what to think about, Trevor. I'm showing you documents that are factually accurate and publicly available. You can draw your own conclusions." She sat with that for a long time. Long enough that the refrigerator cycled twice. I didn't feel the silence. She needed to be in it, not talk through it. "I didn't know about all 3, she said finally. Not to me, to the table, or to herself, or to whatever version of the past 2 years she was currently revising. "I know," I said. She pressed her fingertips to her forehead. The gesture hit me like something physical. I'd watched her do the exact same thing at 13, sitting over a problem she couldn't make work, refusing to give up on it. I got up and put the kettle on. Neither of us said anything while it heated. I made 2 cups of tea and brought them to the table and sat back down, and did not say anything about the way her eyes were wet at the corners, because she wasn't asking me to. We sat like that for maybe 20 minutes. The cups went from warm to cool. Trevor came home the following evening. He'd been out most of the day. He came in through the kitchen, put his keys on the hook, and stopped when he saw Nicole's face. He was good at reading faces. That was part of his operating method. He looked at her, then at me, then back at her. "What?" he said. "I found the court records," Nicole said. "All 3 of them." A pause. Very brief. "I told you those were... I know what you told me." Her voice was level. Steady, not angry. Anger you can argue with. Steadiness you can't. "I'd rather not talk about this right now." Trevor looked at me. I was holding my tea and looking at nothing in particular. The expression of a man with no stake in what's happening. I had refined this expression over 3 decades in conference rooms. "Ray," he said, "did you—" "Trevor," I said pleasantly, "I showed my daughter information available in public court records. If you'd like to discuss your company's civil litigation history, I'm happy to do that. I have a fairly comprehensive picture of it at this point." He stared at me. Something moved across his face. Not quite the full recognition I'd been waiting for, but the beginning of it. He was starting to see the shape of what he'd walked into, even if he didn't yet understand how far it extended. He went upstairs without another word. The following morning he came down and found Nicole in the kitchen. I was in the study, but the door was ajar, so I heard most of it. "You need to talk to him," Trevor said, his voice doing the reasonable thing it did when pressure wasn't working. "Tell him to back off. The IRS situation is affecting the business. It's affecting us." A pause. "I'm not going to do that," Nicole said. 3 words. Flat. Final. Trevor was quiet for a moment. I could almost track what he was doing. Adjusting, recalibrating, switching approaches. He tried the lower tone, the intimate one, the one that had always worked when she was uncertain. Whatever he said was too quiet for me to catch. The front door opened and closed. I came out of the study. Nicole was standing at the counter, not doing anything in particular, just standing. "He'll come to you himself," she said. "I know how he works when one approach stops working. He'll decide he can talk his way through this directly." I picked up my coffee. "Let him," I said. She looked at me for a moment, a long, evaluating look that reminded me she was, whatever else, my daughter. And she had spent 36 years watching how I handled things. "Dad," she said, "what exactly did you set in motion?" I considered the question. It deserved a careful answer. "Something that can't be undone," I said, "and something he can't charm his way out of." She nodded slowly. She didn't ask for more details. She was beginning to understand that she didn't need them. Outside, Trevor's truck pulled out of the driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched it turn and disappear down Wentworth Drive. I thought about a man in polished shoes heading to a meeting with an attorney who was about to explain that the house he'd been planning to own was no longer obtainable, that it was a trust, that the trust had been recorded, that the man who created it had spent 3 decades making exactly this kind of move, and had made it while Trevor Cameron was still watching football in someone else's living room. The coffee was good that morning. I drank it standing at the window. Some moments you want to be awake for. He came to me on a Tuesday evening. I was in the living room with a book I wasn't really reading, my leg propped on the footstool, when Trevor appeared in the doorway with the particular expression of a man who has decided on an approach and is committed to it, regardless of whether it's working. "Ray?" He said it the way you say a word you've practiced. "I think we need to talk." I set the book down. "All right." He sat across from me, not at the kitchen table, which would have been his territory, but in the armchair near the window. The same armchair where, not long ago, he'd watched football, while I stood in the kitchen getting my own water. I noticed he'd chosen to sit rather than stand. Standing is a dominance posture. Sitting, when chosen deliberately, is an attempt at equality. He was recalibrating. "I know things have been tense," he started. "Between us? I get it. I'm not always easy to live with. Nicole will tell you that?" A practiced half smile. "But we're family, Ray. Whatever's happening with the business, that's separate from what we are." I listened. I didn't respond. One of the things you learn about interviews, and a conversation like this is an interview, make no mistake, is that silence after an opening statement almost always produces more useful information than any question you could ask. People fill silence. They can't help it. Trevor filled it. "The IRS thing," he said, "that's going to work itself out. I've got an attorney. We're going through everything. There's a reasonable explanation for the discrepancy. These things happen with small businesses. You know how it is." He paused. "But the timing, with Nicole seeing those court records, and now the property situation." He stopped, recalibrated again. "I just want to make sure we're not in a place where the family gets caught in the middle of something." "The family?" I said pleasantly. "Yeah." "Trevor," I said, "do you know what I did for 31 years? He shifted slightly. "Some kind of government work, wasn't it? I was a senior auditor for the Internal Revenue Service. For 31 years, my job was to find the gap between what people reported and what they actually earned. I was good at it." I kept my voice even, almost gentle. "The kind of gap I found in Cameron Renovations LLC's filing history. $340,000 in public contract revenue, $28,000 in declared profit. That's not an unusual gap, Trevor. I saw that structure, too, 3 times a year. I know exactly what it means and exactly how it gets documented." His face had gone through several expressions in quick succession, the way a deck of cards fans when you riffle the edge. He landed on something controlled and careful. "Ray, the house," I said, "has been an irrevocable living trust since last week. It was recorded with Charleston County the day before yesterday. Any title search on 1847 Wentworth Drive will return the trust as the holding entity, with me as sole trustee and beneficiary. There is no mechanism by which you can be added to the title, sign onto a deed, or claim any interest in the property without my explicit, written consent." I paused. "Which I won't be giving." The silence that followed was the kind that has a specific weight to it. I've sat across from people in that silence before, people who had been certain they were holding all the relevant information and had just discovered they weren't. It's a particular quality of stillness. The body stops, but you can see the mind working very fast behind the eyes. Trevor's jaw was set. His hands, which had been relaxed on the arms of the chair, had tightened slightly at the knuckles. "You went to an attorney," he said. "I did." "Because of me?" I considered the question for a moment. "I went to an attorney because I own a significant asset and should have protected it years ago. Your presence in this house made the timing more urgent, but the action was always the right one." He stood up. The movement was controlled. He wasn't storming out. He was choosing to end the conversation. There's a difference, and the difference tells you something. Storming out is emotion. Choosing to leave is strategy. He was already thinking about his next move. At the door he paused and looked back at me. Something in his face that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite calculation. Something in between with an edge of something I hadn't seen from him before. "This isn't finished," he said. "No," I agreed. It isn't. He went upstairs. I picked up my book. The next morning I woke at 6:30 to find the house quieter than usual. Trevor's truck was not in the driveway. I could see from the bedroom window. When I got downstairs, I found Nicole in the kitchen with coffee, her expression composed in the way it gets when she's already processed something difficult and is on the other side of it. In the hallway, I noticed her suitcase. It was standing near the bottom of the stairs, not at the front door, turned back toward the house, toward the room she'd come from. She saw me notice it. "I took it out," she said. "Then I put it back." I poured my coffee and sat down. "He left early," she said. "Didn't say where." We didn't say anything else about it. We sat with our coffee in the morning quiet of a house that had been a battlefield for 2 years and was slowly, carefully starting to feel like something else. 3 weeks passed with a surface calm that I didn't trust for a moment. Trevor came back the day after our conversation, quieter than before, and the house settled into a watchful arrangement that wasn't peace, but resembled it. He left early, came home late, spent long stretches on his phone in the driveway. Nicole and I moved around each other carefully, not awkwardly, just deliberately, the way you move in a space where you both understand more than you're saying. Then Carla called. "Mr. Gardner, I received a filing this morning from David Whitmore's office. That's Trevor's attorney." A pause that had professional neutrality in it. "He's filed a civil claim in Charleston County. The basis of the claim is that your son-in-law made personal financial contributions to improvements on your property and is entitled to restitution." I sat very still. What improvements? The kitchen renovation, 2 years ago. His claim is that he personally invested $22,000 in the project and that these funds constitute an equitable interest in the property that predates the trust. I thought about the kitchen. New cabinets, countertops, a replacement refrigerator. Trevor had arranged it all, called it a gift, handled the contractors, never asked me for money. I'd let it happen because I'd been, at that point, still choosing to believe in the version of events he was presenting. "What documentation does he have?" I asked. "Receipts. Several of them. Filed as exhibits." "Issued to whom?" Another pause. "Cameron Renovations, LLC." I let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Carla, those are business receipts. LLC expenditures, not personal funds." "I know," she said, which is exactly the argument we'll make. "But I want you to understand. This is a legitimate filing. It will require a response. The claim itself is weak, but dismissal isn't automatic." "How long to respond?" "We have 30 days. I'd like to file our motion to dismiss within the week, with documentation showing the receipts are LLC business records, not personal expenditure. If the judge agrees, and I think she will, the case gets dismissed and his legal costs potentially fall on him." "Potentially?" "South Carolina allows for fee shifting in frivolous civil claims. It's at the judge's discretion, but given the documentation issue, there's a reasonable argument." I told her to proceed. We hung up. I sat in the study for a moment, with the particular feeling that comes when someone makes the move you expected, but were hoping they wouldn't, because it means things are going to get messier before they resolve. That same week, I learned through Carla that the IRS preliminary review had reached a threshold finding. The gap between Cameron Renovations LLC's reported income and the reconstructed revenue figure had landed at $91,400 across 2 tax years. Trevor now faced a notice of deficiency, a proposed assessment of $28,700 in additional tax, plus a penalty for the underreporting pattern. His accountant, a CPA named Mark Tully, who'd done the company's books for 3 years, had withdrawn from the engagement. His letter cited material inconsistencies that I am unable to reconcile. Trevor's attorney on the civil claim had also apparently asked for a $15,000 retainer in cash, which told me something about what Whitmore knew regarding his client's banking situation. I was sitting on the back porch with tea on a Thursday afternoon when I heard the mailbox open and close at the front of the house. In the mailbox, alongside the usual mail, was an envelope with no return address. My name was printed on the front. No stamp, hand-delivered. Inside was a single photograph, taken from across the street or from a parked car, the angle slightly elevated. In it, me, on crutches on a sidewalk in front of a coffee shop on King Street. Beside me stood a man I recognized as Dennis Foley. The photograph was from 5 days earlier. Foley had been in Charleston for an unrelated matter and had called to say he was nearby. We'd met briefly, 10 minutes, outside a coffee shop near his parking garage. Someone had been watching and wanted me to know it. I looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then I put it back in the envelope, went inside, and called Carla. "Someone hand-delivered a photograph to my mailbox," I said when she picked up. "It shows me and the IRS agent I contacted, taken from a distance about 5 days ago. No note, no return address." Silence on her end. "Are you concerned about your safety?" "No," I said. "I'm concerned about their mental state. A man who's watching me from across the street and mailing me evidence of it is not a man executing the strategy. He's a man running out of them." "Mr. Gardner," Carla said carefully, "I need to advise you to take this seriously, regardless." "I'm taking it seriously," I said. "I'm bringing it to your office tomorrow morning. I want it documented, and I want to discuss what it means for the motion to dismiss." I hung up and sat for a moment in the study. Through the window, the afternoon light was going amber, the way it does in Charleston in the early weeks of spring. Slanted and particular, the kind of light that makes ordinary things look considered. The Omega Seamaster in the case on the shelf caught a line of it and held it. Someone had been watching. They'd gone to the trouble of printing a photograph and delivering it by hand. What they intended by it, intimidation, a warning, a demonstration of capability, I wasn't entirely sure. What I was sure of was this: a person operating from strength doesn't send anonymous photographs. A person operating from strength doesn't need to. I picked up the envelope and looked at it one more time. Then I filed it behind the court documents and the registry printouts, and the 4 pages of revenue analysis that had started all of this. Evidence. Everything was evidence. That was the one thing 31 years had made absolutely clear. I brought the photograph to Carla's office the next morning. I set the envelope on her desk and watched her open it and study the image with the neutral expression of someone who has seen most categories of human behavior and stopped being surprised by any of them. "He had someone follow you," she said, "or he did it himself. I can't say which." She set the photograph down. "Mr. Gardner, I need to advise you that if this constitutes intimidation in connection with ongoing litigation—" "It doesn't," I said. "There's no note, no demand, no explicit threat. It's a photograph of 2 people standing on a public sidewalk. Technically, it's nothing." I paused. "But we should document it anyway. Date, method of delivery, chain of custody." She looked at me for a moment. "You're remarkably calm." "I've been in rooms with people who owed the federal government large sums of money and had decided to get creative about it," I said. "Trevor Cameron sending me a photograph from across the street does not qualify as pressure. We filed it as a documented exhibit, a precautionary record attached to our existing case file. Then we got to work on what mattered. The motion to dismiss Trevor's civil claim rested on a single clean argument. The kitchen renovation receipts he had submitted as evidence of personal investment were issued to Cameron Renovations, LLC, not to Trevor Cameron as an individual. A business expenditure by an LLC is not a personal investment by its owner. Under South Carolina law, the corporate veil between an LLC and its member is maintained precisely to prevent this kind of conflation, and Trevor's own attorney, by submitting those receipts as exhibits, had effectively made our argument for us. Carla filed the motion within the week. We attached the LLC registration documents, the receipts themselves with the company name clearly visible, and a brief legal memorandum outlining the relevant case law. The filing went to Charleston County Circuit Court and landed on the docket of Judge Daniel Herbs, who had a reputation, Carla mentioned, for limited patience with procedurally deficient claims. 3 weeks later, Judge Herbs agreed with us. The order came through on a Tuesday afternoon. I was on the back porch when Carla called to read me the relevant language. The court found that the plaintiff had failed to establish a basis for personal equitable interest in the property, as the submitted documentation reflected business expenditures by a corporate entity rather than personal funds. The claim was dismissed. Pursuant to the court's discretion under South Carolina Rule of Civil Procedure 11, the plaintiff was ordered to bear the defendant's legal costs in the amount of $4,100. He has to pay your attorney fees, Carla said, in case I hadn't understood. I heard, I said. Thank you. I sat with that for a moment after we hung up. $4,100, on top of whatever he'd paid David Whitmore to file a losing claim in the first place. Not a ruinous number in isolation, but the IRS situation was not in isolation. 2 days after the dismissal, I received, not from Foley, who maintained his professional distance but through Carla's network, information that the IRS preliminary review had reached its formal conclusion. Cameron Renovations, LLC, had received a notice of deficiency covering 2 tax years. The assessed amount, $28,700 in additional tax liability, plus $8,600 in accuracy-related penalties for the pattern of underreporting. Total federal obligation, $37,300. Trevor's bank, Carla had this from his attorney's office, apparently, had declined his application to refinance his business line of credit. With the IRS claim outstanding and the company accounts still restricted, no lending institution was going to extend new credit to Cameron Renovations, LLC. The company had no new contracts. The 3 active civil suits from subcontractors were still working through the system. The accountant was gone. Cameron Renovations, LLC was, for all practical purposes, finished. I heard from Nicole, in the way you hear things in a house where people are being careful with each other, that Trevor had been staying with his brother. He hadn't told her directly. He'd stopped telling her things directly some time ago. She'd figured it out from the pattern of his absences, and a brief, stripped-down conversation in which he'd said he needed space to sort out the business situation. She'd told me this without a particular expression, the way you relay information you've already processed. She was still at the house on Wentworth Drive. That evening she cooked dinner without being asked, the same pasta she used to make on weeknights when she was 22, and would come over to see me after work, before Trevor, before the years that changed the shape of things. She set 2 plates on the table, and we ate without performing any particular version of the occasion, just the 2 of us in the kitchen. It was, I thought, a beginning. Then my phone rang, Carla's number. "Mr. Gardner," she said, "there's something else. I was reviewing the original LLC registration documents, the ones from when Trevor filed the company in 2021. There's a detail I want you to be aware of." I set my fork down. "Go ahead." The registered agent address listed for Cameron Renovations, LLC at Formation, the legal address used for official correspondence and service of process, is 1847 Wentworth Drive. I was quiet for a moment. "Your address," she said clearly, "listed without your knowledge or consent." I asked Carla to explain the implications. She did, in the precise language of someone who has already thought through what she's about to say. When a business registers a legal address in South Carolina, that address becomes the official point of contact for government correspondence, court filings, and regulatory notices. Any document sent to Cameron Renovations, LLC at that address would arrive at my mailbox, and Trevor, living in my house, would have intercepted it for years. It means he may have been receiving IRS correspondence, subcontractor legal notices, and court filings at your address, Carla said, without your knowledge. As the property owner of record, you were potentially a party to communications you never saw. "Is that actionable?" I asked. Under South Carolina Code, registering a business address without the property owner's consent can constitute a misrepresentation to a state agency. It's not a major felony, but it's a pattern that, combined with everything else, would support an additional civil claim, potentially for damages related to unauthorized use of your address and interference with your mail. I sat with this for a moment. Outside, the evening was settling into the particular blue-gray of a Charleston autumn, the sky going soft at the edges. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see Nicole at the counter, rinsing dishes, moving with the quiet ease of someone who has come home after a long time away. "Carla," I said, "I don't want to file another claim." A pause. "All right. I want you to draft a letter, Send it to Trevor Cameron with a copy to David Whitmore. The terms are simple. Trevor voluntarily amends the registered agent address for Cameron Renovations, LLC, to remove 1847 Wentworth Drive, effective immediately. He provides written acknowledgment, signed and notarized, that he makes no claim of any kind on the property, the trust, or any asset associated with my estate. In exchange, I don't pursue the unauthorized address registration as a separate civil matter. And if he refuses, then you file, I said, but he won't refuse. She had the letter drafted by the following morning. It went out via certified mail and email to Whitmore's office. The terms were simple. Trevor signs or we proceed. He had 7 days to respond. He signed in 4. The notarized document arrived at Carla's office on a Thursday. She sent me the PDF. I opened it, read through it once, and closed it. A man with no remaining options making the only available choice. His signature at the bottom was different from what I imagined it usually looked like. Smaller, tighter, the handwriting of someone who has been diminished. The IRS matter resolved in the weeks that followed. Trevor signed an installment agreement, acknowledging the $37,300 total liability and committing to payment over 36 months. Every month for 3 years, a portion of whatever Cameron Renovations LLC earned would go to the federal government first. The 3 subcontractor lawsuits were still in process. Those were between Trevor and people he'd failed, not my concern to resolve. Cameron Renovations LLC still existed on paper, but a company with an IRS payment plan, frozen credit, no new contracts, and a founder who had signed away all interest in the one significant asset he'd been working toward. That company was a name on a document, and nothing more. I received my cast-off 6 weeks after the initial injury. The doctor cleared me for normal walking. I stood in the parking lot and walked to my car without assistance for the first time in almost 2 months. The air smelled like October in Charleston, slightly salt, the kind that makes you pay attention. I drove home on surface streets, no particular reason, just taking the longer way, past the building where Carla's office occupied the 5th floor, past the coffee shop where someone had photographed me from across the street, a method of pressure that had accomplished nothing except demonstrating that Trevor Cameron was a man who confused motion with strategy. When I got to Wentworth Drive, Nicole's car was in the driveway alongside the empty space where Trevor's truck used to be. I went in through the front door, no crutches, walking at my own pace on my own floor. Nicole was in the living room. She looked up and registered, without comment, that I was walking normally. Something in her expression settled slightly, like a thing held at an angle returning to level. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Better than it did?" I said. I went to the study and opened the glass case where I keep the watches. The 1962 Omega Seamaster caught the afternoon light. Deliberate, the kind of object that has been through a great deal and shows none of it. I wound it by hand. 14 rotations. Then I went to the back porch and sat down in my chair and looked out at the yard, where the mourning doves were working through the birdseed, and the oak tree in the corner had dropped half its leaves. Nicole came out after a while and set a cup of coffee on the table beside me. She sat in the other chair without saying anything. The yard did what yards do in October. Then, "Dad, I'm sorry." 2 words. Quiet. The real kind. I didn't answer right away. A thing said seriously deserves a considered response. "I know," I said finally. "So am I, but we'll figure it out." Not forgiveness. Not yet. Just 2 people who had been in the same family for 36 years, sitting on the same porch, deciding to continue. The house at 1847 Wentworth Drive remained in the Ray Walter, Gardner Revocable Living Trust. It would stay that way for as long as I needed it to. Longer, probably. Some things, once properly secured, stay secured. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to our second channel, and share your impressions in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the field on the left. Thank you for watching.